Good afternoon, students. Today you will have a lecture on immunity. So, uh, who is a person or who do you say is immune? Okay. So, a person is said to be immune when he possesses specific protective antibodies or cellular immunity as a result of previous infection or immunization, or is so conditioned by such previous experiences as to respond adequately to prevent infection and or clinical illnesses following exposure to a specific infectious agent. So this is a definition of a person who is immune. Now what do you understand by this definition? Now you can say that a person is immune if he has certain antibodies or certain cellular immunity. Okay, and how did he acquire this immunity? Because of certain previous infections or maybe immunization, and by these things he's been conditioned to all these previous experiences so that he can respond adequately for further infections or any clinical illnesses followed by exposure to that specific infectious agent. I feel so. With this, you're clear with the definition of what exactly a person who is immune means. That means that with previous antibodies or maybe certain antibodies or cellular immunity has been developed, and this immunity is developed because of maybe infection or immunization, and he has his previous experience, so that further on exposure to specific infectious agents he can prevent infection or the any clinical illness. Okay, so in short it actually means that once these microorganisms have already breached our local defense mechanisms, okay, local defense, like you have the first line, second line, okay, and the third line. So mainly in your first line is the skin, mucous membrane. So all this, if the microorganism has already breached these defense mechanisms, then by virtue of these defenses the host can recognize and destroy these antigenic material. It could be any bacteria, it could be any virus, or it could be any protein. Okay, so this is as an introductory part for your immune system. So this is the definition, and you should understand that if any microorganisms are entering your body, maybe bacteria, virus or protein, how your body responds to them and how it can destroy these with the help of your immunity. Okay. Now, these specific defenses could be classified for our convenience into active and passive immunity. So, active immunity, again, it has various different types like the humoral immunity, the cellular immunity, and the combination of both of these. Okay. Then you have passive immunity, which is which could be classified as normal human immunoglobulins or specific human immunoglobulins or the animal antitoxins or the antiserum. So this is a classification which we have done for our convenience, and mainly our specific defenses could be classified as active and passive. Again, active into 3 types and passive into 3 types. Okay. Now, what does active immunity mean? Okay, so it is the immunity which an individual develops as a result of infection or maybe immunization, okay, specific immunization, and it is usually associated with presence of antibodies or cells having a specific action on the microorganism concerned with a particular infectious disease or its toxin. Okay, so you know now that active immunity is the one which is developed by maybe a infection or a specific immunization, or maybe so at the end it is the antibodies that our body forms to fight against these infectious agents. Okay, and moving on, that this active immunity that is got is very specific for a particular disease. Okay, now active immunity can be acquired in three ways. The first is following clinical infection, like maybe a infection with chicken pox, rubella, measles, or following subclinical or inapparent infections. Even after that, we can develop active immunity. Then following immunization with an antigen, which may be a killed vaccine, a live attenuated vaccine, or a toxoid. Okay, so this is about your active immunity, that is the one that is developed following infection or maybe immunization. Okay. Now moving on to what is an immune response. Immune responses could be classified into two important types, that is a primary response and a secondary response. Now what do you understand by a primary response? So primary response is when an antigen is administered for the first time. Okay, so when an animal or human is exposed to any antigen for the first time, he develops this primary immune response. Okay, so the latent period, it takes about 3 to 10 days before these antibodies could appear in the blood. Fine. So this primary response, I told you that it is the antibodies or the response that is being developed when an antigen enters for the first time into any animal or human being. So it takes around 3 to 10 days. Okay, the antibody that is elicited first is entirely of the IgM type. Okay, so here in this picture you can see this is a picture diagram for a primary response. Okay, so in primary response you can see that the first one to develop is the antibody to develop is the IgM. So the IgM antibody titers, they increase steadily for 2 to 3 days. See, you know that first the gap what you can see, that is the latent period, that it could be anywhere from 3 to 10 days. Okay, after this gap, then the IgM antibody begins to increase, the titer begins to increase, and it increases for 2 to 3 days, reaches a peak, and then it declines almost as fast as it developed. So if it is taking 2 to 3 days to develop, then it would take again 2 to 3 days to come back. Okay, the titers fall after 2 days. Okay, 2 days it reaches its peak, and again after 2 days it falls down. So after that, if the antigenic stimulus was sufficient, then the IgG antibody could appear, and this IgG, you can see it reaches a peak by 7 to 10 days, and then it gradually falls over a period of weeks or months. Okay, now about the immune response, the primary response, and after this we would see something known as a secondary response. Okay, now sticking on to the primary response, the nature and extent of this primary response to an antigen is determined by many factors. Okay, now what are they? It depends on the dose of antigen. If the dose is less, I've even told you that IgG is developed only if the dose is sufficient. Okay, and this development of this primary response, whether IgG could be developed or only IgM could be got, all this, it has the dose of the antigen has a very important role to play when it comes to the immune response. Then it is the nature of the antigen, and the other important factors could be the route of administration, okay, any adjuvants which are there, so very important when it comes to the immunization, okay. Then the nutritional status of the host. So these are among the various factors that could influence the primary immune response. So these are the most important ones. There could be many other factors which has a very important role to play with the immune response. Okay. Now, once we know what is primary response, okay, then how it develops, how many days it takes, and what are the various factors that have a role to play when it comes to the primary immune response. Next, we'll see the importance of primary antigenic challenge. Now, why is this important? The primary response which we are going to get, why and how it is important? The most important thing is that it brings about the education of the reticuloendothelial system. Okay, so there is a production of memory cells. Okay, by education of these reticuloendothelial cells, we get the memory cells or the primed cells. Okay, and this we are going to get both by the B and T lymphocyte, and these are the cells which are responsible for this immunological memory, and this is a very important basis for our immunization. Okay, so this is about your primary response. Okay. Moving on to the secondary response, or you can even call it as the booster response. So the name itself will tell you that this is a response to the booster doses, or maybe the second when the antigenic material affects for the second time, okay, enters the body for the second time. Okay, so now this is the response to a booster dose. It differs in a number of ways from the primary response. So how does it differ? Now this is an important one. It could be asked, the immune response itself could be asked as a short question for you, and in that you could be specifically asked that how is secondary response different from primary response. Okay, now you can see that the latent period, because you have memory cells already, the endothelial reticular endothelial system is primed, so the latent period that is there is very short. The production of antibodies also is very fast, and it is more abundant. The antibodies that are produced are abundant. The antibody response will be maintained at a higher level for a longer period of time, and then the antibody elicited tends to have a greater avidity or capacity to bind to its antigen. So you can see overall, if you see, it's very quick. That means the latent period is short, the antibodies would be more abundant and lasting for a longer period, and even the power, the capacity to bind to the antigen is more, okay, when it is with the booster doses or the secondary response. Now the next important thing that you should know with secondary responses, that it involves the production of both IgG and IgM antibodies, and there is a collaboration between B and T cells to start or initiate the secondary response. Then what usually happens is there is a brief production of IgM antibody and a much larger and more prolonged production of IgG antibodies. Okay, this response is mainly, I told you, because of the immunological memory, okay, that is there because of the primary response, and both these primary and secondary responses are the base for your vaccination. So I was telling you about this, that the secondary response involves both IgM and IgG, and it's that it is mainly because of the immunological memory that we have, and both these are the basis for your vaccination. Okay. Now, moving forward to the humoral immunity, which usually comes from your B cells, that is the bone marrow derived lymphocytes, which proliferate and manufacture specific antibodies after antigen presentation by macrophages. Okay, so you should know that this is mainly from your bone marrow. Okay, bone marrow derived lymphocyte, that is the B cells, which produce the antibodies. So you must be knowing that how these immunoglobulins or the antibodies are. The structure, I feel you have already learned this, that they have the heavy chain and the light chains, and then at the end they have the receptors, okay, the area where the antigen binds. So these are the basic ones, but maybe you'll learn them even in micro. Okay, so moving on with this immunity, that is the antibodies are localized in the immunoglobulin fraction of the serum. Okay, you can find these in the this fraction, immunoglobulin fraction of a serum, fine. And the major or the important classes that we see is the IgG, IgM, IgA, IgD and IgE. Okay, you can have further subclasses, but these are your main classes. Okay, and you should know that these antibodies, they circulate in the blood. Okay, means they circulate in the body, and they act directly by neutralizing the microorganisms or maybe the toxins, and usually what they do is the microorganisms which are there, they render, means they actually make these microbes susceptible to be attacked by the leukocytes and the monocytes. Okay, so this is the main function of your antibodies. They are there in the body, and whenever there is a microbial attack or maybe the toxins are there, they neutralize them and they make these the whole component becomes very susceptible to the attack of these leukocytes and monocytes. Okay. Now, the other important aspect of antibodies are they are specific. That is, they react with the same antigen which provoked their production or a closely related one. Okay. Now moving forward to cellular immunity. Now what does this cellular immunity mean? Okay, so you know that the antibodies, okay, or this immunity that is got by the antibodies, it does not cover all the situations, okay, that one could find in any infectious diseases. Like taking certain examples like Mycobacterium leprae or maybe Mycobacterium tuberculosis, okay, the S. typhi, Candida albicans, and there are so many viruses which could escape this bactericidal action of this leukocyte. So in such situations, actually you can see that the microorganisms actually multiply in these mononuclear leukocytes or the macrophages. So what could happen is that the macrophages could be stimulated by substances, okay, like lymphokines. So what can happen is the macrophages, when stimulated by these lymphokines, which are secreted by specific stimulated T lymphocytes. Now what are these? These are the ones that are got from your thymus. Okay, T lymphocytes are thymus derived lymphocytes. Now this activated macrophages, that is activated by this lymphokines, okay, they perform a much more efficient phagocytic function than this non activated macrophage. Okay. So continuing with cellular immunity, it is the it is mainly mediated by the T cells. I told you T cells is from the thymus, which differentiate into subpopulations, and it's able to help the B lymphocytes. The T cells do not secrete antibodies but are responsible for the recognition of antigens. So what actually happens on contact with antigen, the T cells initiate a chain of responses. I told you that this activation of macrophages, and why this is important, the activated macrophages can easily be deactivated or destroyed. Okay, so this the phagocytic property or the action becomes much better when these macrophages are activated. Then release of cytotoxic factors or the mononuclear inflammatory cells, then reactions like delayed hypersensitivity reactions, then secretion of these immunological mediators or the for example the immune interferons and all these. So T cells are important for all these, by all these means they can bring about immunity, or they could help the B lymphocyte. Okay. Then there is when you compare both of these, okay, the cell mediated immunity is said to be very more important. Okay, so there is evidence that cellular immunity is responsible for immunity against lot of diseases, especially against tuberculosis and brucellosis. So, and again it's important for the body's rejection of foreign materials such as skin grafts, okay, and so on. The importance of cell mediated immunity could be appreciated from the fact that a child born with a defect, okay, with a humoral antibody production defect, he could survive for as long as 6 years, okay, without any replacement therapy. But a severe defect in the cell mediated immunity could result in mortality within 6 months. Okay, so this shows the importance that cell mediated immunity is very important for the survival. Okay. Now combination of both of these, in addition to the B and T lymphoid cells, which are responsible for recognizing self and non-self, so actually they usually cooperate with one another and with few other cells like the macrophages and the human K or the killer cells. Together they form these complex events of immunity. So you know that both the B cells, T lymphoid cells and few other cells together, they bring about immunity. Now we'll see the advantages of active immunity. Now active immunity takes time to develop. It is superior to passive immunity. Why? Because the duration of protection, like that of a natural infection, is usually long lasting. There are with very few exceptions, severe reactions are rare. The protective efficacy of active immunization exceeds that of passive immunization. So sometimes it could be said that it is almost 100%. It's less expensive, and preparation of vaccines is more cheaper than producing the anti-serum. So you know that active immunization has more advantages when you compare it to passive immunization, whether it is the protection that it provides, whether it is the duration for which it gives protection, and even the severe reactions I told you is very less, and it's more cost effective. Now active immunization also has certain limitations, that the person is immunized here only for small doses of this pathogenic agent or toxins, and there exists a threshold, so beyond which the resistance could fail. Okay, so this could explain why people even with immunization they get diseases like typhoid or diphtheria. So this could explain that even with immunization people are getting infections because the dose that uh, the infective dose or the pathogenic agent is crossing that threshold. I told you because we have developed this immunity for small doses of the pathogenic agent, and there could be many factors which could be involved in maintaining of this immunity, like immunity could reduce or fall in certain situations like fatigue, strain surrounding, if there is change of diet or ingestion of drugs, or if there is an emotional shock. So all these could be instances where our immunity could fall. Now, what is passive immunity? When antibodies produced in one body, it could be a human or animal, are transferred to another to induce protection against that disease. So this is known as passive immunity. So here antibodies are not produced by the body like what we have seen with the previous one, the active immunity. Here so what we had seen with active immunity was the body was producing its own antibodies, but in passive immunity we are taking antibodies that are produced in some other human or animal, and this could induce protection against disease. So in other words, the body does not produce its own antibody but depends upon ready-made antibodies. So how we could induce this or bring about this passive immunity? The first thing is that by administration of an antibody containing preparation. Okay, so a ready-made antibody preparation is there, like immunoglobulin or antiserum, so that could be given. Then by transfer of maternal antibodies across the placenta, even the human milk contains antibodies, that is the IgA, and we could even get passive immunity by transferring of lymphocytes. Okay, so the cell mediated immunity, this could be done, but this is again in a experimental stage. Now how this passive immunity differs from active immunity. So mainly what we have seen is immunity, what we get here is very rapidly established because it's ready made. You're just putting it into already produced antibody, you're just putting it into somebody, so it's very rapidly got. Immunity produced is temporary. Okay, what we have seen with active immunity is it could be long lasting. Okay, so that drawback is there with passive immunity. It is only temporary, that is, it is days to months till the antibody is eliminated from the body. There is no education of the reticular endothelial system. So what we have seen with our active immunity, so there is this reticuloendothelial system that is activated, memory cells are there, so that is what we spoke of. These memory cells will help us in, or it is the base for your immunization program. So that is not seen with passive immunity. Now passive immunization is useful for individuals who cannot form antibodies, or for the normal host who takes time to develop antibodies following active immunization. Herd immunity. So what is herd immunity? Herd immunity is also known as community immunity. Okay, it is a type of immunity that occurs when the vaccination of a portion of a population, okay, or you can say it, you can call it a herd, which provides protection to the unprotected individuals. So it is based on this the herd immunity you can say that it you can explain herd immunity because that it states that diseases, especially communicable diseases, which pass from one person to another, so it's very difficult for this chain of infection to happen in a community when large number of people are immune. Okay, so the higher the number of immune individuals, the lower the chances that a susceptible person could come in contact with the infectious agent. So with this base, now I feel you've understood what is herd immunity. So it actually means that if many people are immune, then there are very less chances that a susceptible person could come in contact with this infectious agent, and in this ways even the people who are unprotected could be could get that immunity by the virtue of these people who are vaccinated or who are protected. Okay, so it is a level of resistance of one community or a group of people to that particular disease. Now, herd immunity provides an immunological barrier to the spread of disease in the human herd. Okay. So, another important thing is if for any infectious disease, if it's introduced into a virgin population, or you can say a population which has very low or no immunity for that particular disease, then the attack, the case fatality rate, all these will be very high because there are a lot of susceptible people there. One example of this was severe measles epidemic took place in Faroe Islands in 1854, and this was because none of the people were immune or they were not exposed to measles before, and this wave of epidemic, it came down only when the herd immunity developed in the community, and this herd immunity developed because of natural infection there. Now, elements which contribute to herd immunity. So what are these? What contributes to a herd immunity in a community? So it is the occurrence of clinical and subclinical infection in the community, and if there is any vaccine available for that disease, so immunization of that herd. And the herd structure. Now what is herd structure? It is the it involves everything which is what compromises the herd, especially means how many people living there. So all this is the herd structure. Now it's never constant because it varies because of new births, deaths, population mobility, or the immunization, like whatever is there that affects your herd immunity. And the structure also is a very important component of your herd immunity. Now this is one what we are speaking of. You might have heard of herd immunity now very often, that in this present pandemic what's happening, so many people are speaking about if we develop a herd immunity against this, there is to certain extent, if we are able to achieve it, then definitely the number of cases and all those would be will fall. Okay, so in this case, because there is no vaccination, we are depending on maybe the occurrence of clinical or subclinical infections, and after certain stage maybe we could develop the herd immunity. Now moving forward, so we already spoke about herd structure. So we have spoke that it's not constant, it involves the human population, but it's not just the human population. The herd structure even involves the animal hosts, the insect vectors, the environmental and social factors. So all these factors, maybe they could favor or inhibit the spread of infection from host to host. Now moving on to the herd immunity, which could be if it's sufficiently high, definitely there could be no epidemic of that disease, and we could keep the herd immunity high by this ongoing immunization programs. There are certain diseases where we have almost eliminated few diseases, or maybe we have had proper control. So few examples where herd immunity has played a very important role is diphtheria and poliomyelitis. Now moving on, there are examples of certain diseases where herd immunity has not uh, not played a very important role, you can say, in eradication. Giving an example of smallpox. So in smallpox, it is the surveillance and the containment measures which had a very important role to play in eradication of the disease. Now with abolition of vaccination, or you can say with time, maybe even the herd immunity definitely is going to reduce for this disease with passage of time. And another example is of tetanus, where herd immunity has it doesn't protect an individual. If the individual has taken vaccination, then he would be protected. So herd immunity has no major role in these diseases. Then the other important thing what you need to know with herd immunity is, herd immunity could be or maybe determined by serological surveys. That is, the serological epidemiology is very important to determine what is the herd immunity for that population. Now another important thing what you should know with herd immunity is that it is never possible for any population, or you can say any place, to have a 100% herd immunity, okay, for that particular population. But uh, their herd immunity, it does contribute to halt an epidemic or control a disease. But again, a big question is how much less than 100% uh, is required to control this disease. Okay, so this is a difficult answer for every disease, and for every population maybe it could differ, so it's not fixed. But again, I told you 100% is difficult to achieve, but how much less than 100% for that particular disease to have proper control or to reduce the cases is again a big question. Immunizing agents. Immunizing agents may be classified as vaccines, immunoglobulins, and antisera. Now, starting from vaccines. Now, we have heard about vaccines and we know about our vaccination schedule, our program. So, we know that by vaccination we were able to eradicate certain diseases. Now, you know that's smallpox and poliomyelitis as well. So, it has a very important role to play in this, in bringing about control of these infectious diseases. And we know that by vaccination we could save almost millions of lives every year. Now, what is vaccination, or what is a vaccine? Vaccine is an immunobiological substance which is designed to produce specific protection against a given disease. Okay, so it stimulates the production of protective antibodies and other immune mechanisms. So we have already seen this in a active immunization. So how antibodies are produced and how we can protect oneself from that particular infectious disease. So vaccines may be prepared from live modified organisms, or maybe inactivated or killed organisms, extracted cellular fraction, toxoids, or combination of these. More recent preparations are the subunit vaccines and the recombinant vaccines. Now, vaccines could be classified into live vaccines, killed vaccines, and the subunit vaccines. Now, starting with live vaccines. A few examples of live vaccines are the BCG, measles, oral polios, which are prepared from live, generally attenuated organisms. Now, what does this mean? These organisms have to be passed repeatedly in the lab, or in tissue culture or the chick embryos, and they lose their capacity to bring or to induce a full blown disease, but they retain their immunogenicity. So what does this mean? That once these organisms are passed through a series in this tissue culture or the chick embryo, what happens to them is they lose their capacity to bring about disease, but only the immune system could be activated, and active immunity could be developed against that particular disease. So now, in general, these live vaccines are more potent immunizing agents than the killed vaccines. Now, the reason being, live organisms multiply in the host, and the resulting antigenic dose is larger than what we have actually injected. Live vaccines have all the major and minor antigenic components. Live vaccines engage certain tissues of the body, as for example, intestinal mucosa by the oral polio vaccine. There may be other mechanisms such as the persistence of latent virus. So all these have a very important role, and so they are much superior or much potent immunizing agents than the killed vaccines. Contraindications of live vaccines. Live vaccines should not be administered to people with immunodeficiency or people whose immune response is suppressed because of certain diseases, or maybe if they are on certain therapies, certain diseases like leukemia, lymphoma or malignancy, and in certain therapies like if they are on steroids, if they are on antimetabolic agents, alkylating agents or radiation. So in all these conditions the immune system is or the immune response is much lower, so we cannot administer these live vaccines. Pregnancy is again another contraindication, and in pregnancy even we need to wait if the risk of infection is much more and the harm exceeds much more, then we can think about it. So um, if we compare the risk to the mother and the harm to the fetus, so these things should be weighed, and if needed it could be given, otherwise pregnancy is a contraindication. Now, killed vaccines. So inactivated or these killed vaccines, they are that are produced by growing these viruses or the bacteria in culture media, and then inactivating them with heat or any chemicals. When injected into the body, this stimulates the active immunity, and you can see that they are usually safe but less efficacious than the live vaccines. For example, the cholera vaccine, it offers only 50% protection. The pertussis vaccine, even with 3 doses, it gives 80% protection for the first 3 years, and it's almost nil by 12 years of age after, or 12 years after vaccination. So killed vaccines usually require a primary series of maybe 2 or 3 doses of vaccine to produce an adequate antibody response, and in most of the cases booster injections are required. And the duration of immunity following the use of inactivated vaccines, it varies from months to many years. And another very good example of this inactivated vaccine is the inactivated polio vaccine, which has been very effective uh, with this widespread use of this vaccine, wherein certain countries has even led to the elimination of the disease by using this inactivated polio vaccine. Killed vaccines are usually administered by the subcutaneous or the intramuscular route. The only absolute contraindication for this killed vaccines is a severe local or general reaction to the previous dose. As these vaccines, they do not multiply or grow in the body compared to the live vaccines, and that's why they are much more safe when you compare it to the live vaccines. And to know about the comparisons between live and killed vaccines, so we have already discussed these points, that in killed vaccines the number of doses required are multiple, we may need a adjuvant, and the duration of immunity here is shorter. The protection is much lower when you compare it to live vaccine. The immunoglobulins produced is usually of the IgG type. The mucosal or the cell mediated immunity is very poor, and a residual virulent virus in vaccine could be possible. And then Few other important points like its stability at room temperature is much more higher in killed vaccine. Now moving to the live vaccine. Live vaccine usually single dose is sufficient, and the protection what we get, the immunity is longer, it's much more better. The immunoglobulins produced are both IgA and IgG. Adjuvants needed and all is not usually required, and here what we see in live vaccines is the mucosal immunity, the cell mediated immunity are all there, and reversion to virulence is possible with these live vaccines, and that's why it is more there are contraindications of these live vaccines when it comes to the immunocompromised people. The next important type what I mentioned is the subunit vaccines. Okay. Now subunit vaccines could again be classified into toxoids, the protein vaccines, recombinant protein vaccine, polysaccharide based vaccine, conjugated vaccine. We'll see one by one what the toxoids. Certain organisms produce exotoxins like the diphtheria and the tetanus toxins. The toxins produced by these organisms are detoxicated and used in the preparation of vaccines. We have certain antibodies and the antibodies that are produced by these vaccines, they neutralize this toxic moiety. Whenever there is infection, they act on this toxins that are produced rather than acting on the organisms. In general, these toxoid preparations are highly efficacious and safe immunizing. Protein vaccines. Now, in case immunization with a single protein or a combination of proteins from a pathogen is sufficient to stimulate a protective immune response against any microorganisms, so we can go for these protein-based vaccines. Usually these proteins can be purified from these in vitro cultures of these microorganisms. Like these microorganisms are grown and then they are taken, the protein component which is required is taken, then purified, okay, and then used to prepare vaccines. Examples being the licensed cellular pertussis vaccine and the influenza vaccine. Next is the recombinant protein vaccine. So here development of the recombinant deoxyribonucleic acid technology. By this technology we can use, like it is possible to express these protective protein antigens in heterologous expression systems like E. coli, yeast, mammalian cells, okay, or the baculovirus. So what could be done? So whichever protein of interest, it could be grown in these systems, and then what could be done is this protein could be again purified. One thing to remember here is this protein is much purer than the protein what we get from these bacteria which are grown in the cultures and then purified. So comparatively the recombinant protein vaccines are much pure, but there is a drawback that the immunogenicity that is required is less. So in this case we need a adjuvant. An example is the hepatitis B vaccine. Hepatitis B vaccine can be grown in yeast. Polysaccharide based vaccines. So the surface of many pathogenic bacteria is covered by a capsular shell which is made by a polymeric glycan. Okay, so we can see that our immune system many a times act on these polysaccharide the glycan capsule other than acting on the bacteria, and this by this usually the bacteria are not destroyed. So what could be done is we could stimulate the antibody response against this surface polysaccharide of the pathogenic bacteria, and so we could uh, prepare vaccines against these polysaccharide of the pathogenic bacteria. What is usually seen here is there are there is a difference between the strain, the serotype. So whatever the vaccine produced here would be very much serotype specific, and we need to include a lot of serotypes to prepare vaccines by this method. So examples here could be the vaccine used in S. salmonella, S. Pneumonia, Salmonella typhimurium. So by using this polysaccharide based vaccines, we could prepare vaccine or for the or having a antibody response for this surface polysaccharide. Now conjugated vaccines. So it could be seen that children under 2 years of age do not respond well to antigens such as polysaccharides, which produce antibodies via a T cell independent mechanism. So what could be done? This polysaccharide antigen could be chemically linked or conjugated to a protein that recognize these T cells. Okay, then these conjugated vaccines could elicit a very strong immune response and a immune memory in young children. Examples again, the pneumococcal vaccine and meningococcal vaccines. Coming to combinations, if more than one kind of immunizing agent is included in the vaccine, it could be called a mixed or combined vaccine. The aim of combined vaccine is to simplify administration, reduce the cost, minimize the number of contacts of the patient with the health system. Few examples of combinations are the DPT, that is diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, or we could have diphtheria, tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis. We have MMR, measles, mumps and rubella. Pneumovansa, the pentavalent vaccine, that is the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, along with hepatitis B and Hib, that is Haemophilus influenza type B. Few other terminologies what you need to know here is the polyvalent vaccine and the autogenous vaccine. Polyvalent vaccines are prepared from two or more strains of the same vaccine, and autogenous is applied when the organism in the vaccine is obtained from the same patient. Now few other components that we use in vaccines are the adjuvants. Now what are adjuvants? They are substances which are added to a vaccine to enhance the immune response, maybe by degree or duration, okay, making it possible to reduce the amount of immunogen that we could add per dose or the total number of doses needed to achieve immunity. Okay, now moving on to other terminologies like the antibiotics. Now antibiotics also need to be added at times, so they are used during the manufacturing phase to prevent this bacterial contamination to these cultures. Next is preservatives. These are chemicals like thiomersal, formaldehyde added to kill. Uh, it's usually added to kill all the subunit vaccines. Then we have stabilizers. Now stabilizers are to confirm product quality or stability. Compounds need to be added to vaccine for a variety of manufacture related issues like controlling the pH, okay, and stabilizing these agents. So these are a few other components that have to be used in vaccines. Coming to few future prospects that we need to know here is the newer ones is use of recombinant DNA techniques to insert the gene coding of the protein of interest to a genome. It could be usually a virulent virus. So this is being tried and used now. Then the few other things is including only the subviral components, okay, in a vaccine which we need to stimulate this protective antibody. Then the next ones are use of purified proteins isolated from purified virus or synthesized from cloned genes. Like we could one example is using this or the recombinant hepatitis B virus vaccine, where the virus proteins are synthesized in yeast cells. Then use of synthetic peptides, okay, that corresponds to antigenic determinants on a viral protein. So this could be used to prepare vaccines. Then another important thing is development of edible vaccines. So one advantage of this would be the ease of administration. Then use of naked DNA vaccines, which is a simple, cheap and a safe method in which a recombinant plasmid carrying the gene for the protein of interest could be injected into host. Okay. Then administration of vaccines locally, usually at the portal of entry. So another, like a good example is using these aerosol vaccines. Moving on to immunoglobulins, the human immunoglobulin system is composed of 5 major classes, that is IgG, IgM, IgA, IgD and IgE. Okay, there are other subclasses also within them. So these various classes and subclasses of immunoglobulins, they represent different functional groups that are required to meet different type of antigenic challenges. Now, it is known that all the antibodies are immunoglobulins, but still it is a question whether all immunoglobulins are antibodies. Just in short about these immunoglobulins, I told you IgG, it is a major immunoglobulin in the serum, and about 80% of the immunoglobulins is IgG. And about it, it is largely extravascular. And another important point is the half-life is about 21 days. Now moving to the IgM, which is around 6% in the serum. And one thing about IgM is it is the first immunoglobulin to be produced after any infection. So it indicates a recent infection. Half-life is around 7 days. Moving on to IgA, it constitutes around 13% and it's there in most of the body fluids like saliva, milk, okay, then colostrum, tears, and the half-life of IgA is around 6 to 8 days. One important thing about IgA is usually it is there in the mucous membranes, and it usually acts as for local infections. Then IgE, half-life around 2 days, and you can see that in helminthic infections or allergies, IgE is increased. About IgD acts as an antigen receptor when present on surface of certain B lymphocytes. Immunoglobulin preparations. Two types of immunoglobulin preparations are available for passive immunization. They are normal human immunoglobulin and specific human immunoglobulins. They are used in prophylaxis of viral and bacterial infections and in replacement of antibodies in immunodeficient patients. In short, about the normal human immunoglobulins, that it is prepared by an antibody-rich fraction obtained from a pool of at least 1,000 donors. So there are certain criteria that it should have at least 90% of immunoglobulins. It should be free from these IgG aggregates. Then all the IgG subclasses should be there, and very low IgA concentration should be there, and at least it should have antibodies of at least 2 bacterial species and 2 viral species. Now um, it it is used to prevent measles or maybe hepatitis A infections in travelers, and in outbreaks of hepatitis A infections it could be used. A point to be remembered is live vaccine should not be given for at least 12 weeks after injection of a normal human immunoglobulin, and if live vaccines are given, then normal human immunoglobulin should not be given at least for 2 weeks. About specific human immunoglobulins, they are it should contain at least 5 times the antibody potential of the standard preparation per unit volume. Okay, and usually these specific human immunoglobulins are got from people who have just recovered from an infection or following vaccination. Then this specific human immunoglobulins is usually given intramuscularly. To avoid pain, we can uh, give it with the Procaine, uh, which is 1%, and it's in a mixture of 1 part to 10 parts of immunoglobulins. That is 1 part of 1% Procaine with 10 parts of immunoglobulin. So peak is reached after 2 days after giving this IM injection, and the half-life is around 20 to 35 days. Advantages are of these immunoglobulins are freedom from hepatitis B, concentration of the antibodies into a small volume for this IM use, and stable antibody content. There could be certain reactions like local and systemic. Local pain, sterile abscesses, and systemic it could be early and late, or the in the early one it is the anaphylactic uh, anaphylactic type of signs and symptoms that we could see, and in the late reactions we have arthralgias, pyrexias, and diarrheas. About a word about antisera. Antisera or antiserum means materials prepared in animals, usually the non-human sources like horses, and it is used in a number of diseases. Now moving to the summary of what we have seen today. So to summarize, we spoke about the immunity, that is the active and passive immunity, and the immunizing agents, that is the vaccines. In vaccines we spoke about live, killed, and the subunit vaccines, and then about immunoglobulins and the antiserum. In immunoglobulins we have seen about the normal human immunoglobulin and the specific human immunoglobulins. Thank you.